Whether it's the cursed Bulgarian phone number linked to multiple mysterious deaths or the CIA's not so well thought out Operation Acoustic Kitty, yeah, they thought, hey, why don't we try using cats as spies? Spoiler alert, it didn't work. These are the kind of facts that sound too strange to be real, but I promise you, they absolutely are. Here are 20 random facts that might not seem it, that are 100% true. Sure, everyone has bad days at work, but imagine if feeling miserable was literally your one job. Well, it was if you were a funeral mute. Believe it or not, these guys were paid to show up at funerals, stay completely silent, and look as miserable as possible. They didn't know anyone, they wouldn't talk or interact, they'd just stand around looking like the weight of the world was on their shoulders. And funeral mutes were in pretty high demand, particularly back in the Victorian era, a time when public displays of mourning were more theatre than emotion. So when I say Rat King, what springs to mind? No doubt you're picturing a rat sitting on a throne, crown firmly affixed to its head, holding a little tiny rat scepter. Well, you'd be way off the mark. Try instead picturing a cluster of rats fused together at their tails by filth, frozen waste, and other disgusting things I won't mention. Yes, this is a real thing. When rats huddle together for warmth or shelter, their tails can become so tightly knotted they can't escape. This causes them to form a grotesque living rat ball, commonly known as a rat king. The largest recorded rat king specimen is housed in Berlin's Museum of Natural History. It consisted of no less than 32 individual rats. It's literally the stuff of nightmares. The phrase cat got your tongue has some pretty gruesome origins. We use it today when someone is uncharacteristically silent. But in ancient Egypt, it was a little bit darker. Back then, the crime for lying was to literally have your tongue severed, chopped right off, and fed to the cats. Why cats? Well, they were considered sacred animals thought to be connected to the goddess Bastet, the protector of truth and justice. Feeding them a liar's tongue was a symbolic way of purging dishonesty and protecting the truth. So you've arrived in Bulgaria and you need a new phone number. Just make sure it's not this one. If you thought the number 8 was lucky, think again. In Bulgaria, the phone number 088888888 is officially cursed. It's been linked to no less than 4 mysterious deaths. The first was Vladimir Grashnov, CEO of the phone company that issued the number. He died of cancer shortly after receiving it. Then came Konstantin Dimitrov, a businessman with mafia ties who was shot dead in Amsterdam. And the curse continued with 2 more untimely deaths until the phone company took the extreme step of retiring the number permanently. In Alabama, a 200-foot radio tower, the height of a 20-story building, literally vanished overnight. And it gets weirder. Dismantling a 200-foot tower takes some serious machinery, but no one heard or witnessed anything. All that was left behind was the tower's concrete base. Despite the FBI launching an investigation, no evidence has ever been found, and the mystery of the missing radio tower remains unsolved. In the early 1900s, Bailey Radium Laboratories sold a so-called miracle cure called Radithor. It was marketed to treat everything from fatigue to aging. But the only issue was that, as the name suggests, the elixir contained radium, a highly radioactive substance that, when ingested, accumulates in the bones and causes severe radiation poisoning. And this was the case for Eben Byers, a wealthy businessman who drank so much Radithor that his jaw literally disintegrated. His death sparked outrage and ultimately led to the 1938 establishment of the FDA. During the height of the Cold War, the CIA, in its infinite pursuit of espionage innovation, thought, hey, why don't we go ahead and use cats as spies? So they did, and Operation Acoustic Kitty was born. The plan involves surgically implanting miniature listening devices into cats, a microphone, transmitter, and battery, and sending them off to roam freely to eavesdrop on the enemy. But it's no surprise the operation failed miserably. Just minutes into the first mission, the test cat was struck by a taxi. The failure led to them scrapping the program entirely and made it one of the most ridiculous and costly operations ever conceived. Sleep learning, or hypnopedia, was hugely popular in the early 2000s thanks to a company called Baby Einstein. They sold tapes with titles like Baby Mozart and Language Nursery, promising that babies could absorb languages, facts, and essentially turn into little geniuses overnight. But studies soon exposed the truth that the brain doesn't process learning during sleep the way these tapes suggested. Not only was sleep learning a complete myth, but it disrupted important sleep cycles, hindering natural cognitive development, likely doing more harm than good. I bet you didn't know that back in the 60s, Istanbul had its very own version of Uber, except it wasn't called Uber, it was called Basket Men. These workers stood outside bars ready to carry drunken people home in huge wicker baskets. And it wasn't a simple task. Not only did they carry full-grown adults in baskets, but they did all this while navigating cobblestone roads, steep inclines, and narrow alleyways. And when they arrived at their destination, they took their service game to a whole new level, often tucking drunk passengers into bed to make sure they got a restful night's sleep. 19th century homes often featured witch windows or coffin windows. These were diagonal slanted windows installed at a 45-degree angle, thought to prevent witches from flying through them on their brooms. At the time, belief in witchcraft and the supernatural was widespread, and it wasn't just windows. People would hang protective charms, place symbols above their doors, and even use specific herbs or amulets, all in an effort to ward off witches. So that explains why they were called witch windows, but why coffin windows? Well, they served another purpose, one a bit more practical, and that was to make it easier to remove coffins from upper floors when someone passed. In 1700s high society, fans were more than fashion, they were used to send messages. Women turned simple fan gestures into a whole new language. Fanning slowly signaled, "I'm married." Dropping the fan meant, "Come talk to me," and holding the fan over the right cheek meant yes, while the left meant no. Back then, showing emotion or speaking openly in public was considered improper. So this secretive fan language gave women a way to communicate privately, all while still keeping up appearances. President Trump travels in style inside one of the most heavily armored vehicles on Earth. Known only as the Beast. Custom built by General Motors, it's more tank than car, with 8-inch armored plating, bulletproof glass, and a hermetically sealed interior to guard against chemical attacks. And if you're like me and didn't know what hermetically sealed meant, well, it just means completely airtight. But that's not all. The Beast is even kitted out with encrypted communication lines, tear gas launchers, and a fridge stocked not with the president's favourite champagne, but with emergency supplies of his blood type. Alright, let's be real. He's probably got the champagne too. Back in ancient Rome, it could be pretty frustrating being a sculptor, having to create a statue for every new emperor that came along. So they came up with an idea. Why not create statues with removable heads? And they did just that. Every time a new ruler came into power, which was quite often, they'd swap out the old head for a new one. It ended up being a pretty resourceful way to save on both materials and time. Just better hope the last guy had some rock hard abs. Meh, I'll admit, that was no good. Electric eels are scary enough, what with their ability to shoot up to 600 volts whenever they please. Well, no problem, just don't touch one and you'll be fine, right? Not quite. Electric eels, who incidentally aren't real eels, they belong to the knifefish family, more closely related to catfish and carp, can control their prey from a distance. They do this by emitting electrical pulses that directly affect the nervous system of any nearby fish. These pulses can make prey twitch and reveal their location, or completely freeze in place. Are you the type that gets really annoyed when you hear people chewing loudly, snoring, or clearing their throat? If it's a yes, there's probably a pretty good chance you've got misophonia. Don't worry, 20% of us do. People with the condition often feel extreme discomfort or panic in response to particular sounds. It's all related to how your brain processes these sounds. For people with misophonia, certain noises trigger intense emotional reactions due to an overreaction in the brain's auditory processing center. The brain doesn't just hear these sounds, it associates them with negative emotions like anger or anxiety. So if you're feeling anxious hearing that person slurp away at their soup, just pop in some earplugs. Trust me, you'll calm right down. In 1930s New Zealand, farmers experienced a bizarre epidemic. Their pants were literally exploding. The culprit, sodium chlorate. It was used as a powerful weed killer, but when soaked into cotton or wool, had the unfortunate side effect of becoming highly combustible. A bit of friction, a stray spark, or even body heat caused trousers to erupt into flames. And the number of farmers' pants exploding became so widespread that the government had to intervene. They issued urgent warnings and safety guidelines to address what is now known as the exploding pants epidemic. Ever heard of the Caterpillar Club? It's not the easiest club to join. It's only for those lucky few to have parachuted out of a malfunctioning plane and survived. It was founded by Leslie Irvin in 1919. Leslie, a trained pilot and aviation enthusiast, was himself forced to eject from an aircraft. So he created the club to recognize others that also survived and lived to tell the tale. And what do you get for being in the Caterpillar Club? Well, members receive a special gold caterpillar pin, complete with amethyst eyes, and a chance to bond and share their stories with their fellow survivors. Not a fan of Brussels sprouts? Well, don't be so quick to blame your taste buds, because your genes might be the problem. Specifically, the TAS2R38 gene. It controls how sensitive we are to bitterness, especially in vegetables like kale, cabbage, and broccoli. The gene comes in two versions, one that makes you super sensitive to bitter flavors, and the other one that makes bitterness more bearable. So the next time someone tries to convince you to become a vegetarian, just politely tell them you'd prefer not. It's not in your DNA. Everyone says prison food is pretty bad, but not always. In Bollate, Italy, there's a restaurant called In Galera, Italian slang for in prison. And true to its name, it's located inside an actual prison. Inmates work as chefs, waiters, and kitchen hands, all supervised by a professional, non-criminal head chef. And if you turn up, don't expect to be served microwave mash or instant ramen. No, this place is legit. They serve fine dining dishes like slow-cooked meats and handmade pastas, and even the Michelin Guide thinks it's worth a visit. Only one person in history has ever been struck by a meteorite, and that person was US woman Anne Hodges in 1954. The rock, weighing 8.5 pounds, crashed through her roof, bounced off a radio, and struck her right in the hip. The odds of this happening? 1 in 1.6 million. Well, that's what the planetary scientists say, but I'm sure there's a few assumptions in there. Anyway, Anne was lucky enough to walk away with only a bruise, and despite the government trying to claim the meteorite as federal property, she held her ground and ended up with one of the most valuable paperweights in history. And that's a wrap. Whether it's the mystery behind exploding pants or the odds you'll get struck by a meteorite, you've now got 20 more slightly useless facts to add to the collection. But at least now you know the reason you consider that person chewing loudly in the corner to be your mortal enemy. So I guess they're not all useless. And don't worry, there's more somewhat useless facts where they came from. You should check them out. But until then, keep it real, and I'll catch you next time.